Stopped counting the days lost in the rhythm.
Since a peak in late September, the dollar index has declined by more than 8%, with the greenback expected to have diminished appeal with lower yields in assets such as treasuries as the Fed slows down. In afternoon trading, the dollar rose 0.8% against the Japanese currency to 137.71 yen. It also climbed versus the Swiss franc, up 0.2% at 0.9348 francs, advancing as well versus the Australian and New Zealand dollars, which fell 0.7% and 0.5%, respectively. The euro was flat against the dollar, trading at $1.0535. The single European currency has gained almost 8% so far in the fourth quarter, with investors having previously banked on the European Central Bank sticking to a course of aggressive rate hikes. The dollar index, which measures the greenback's value against 6 major currencies, was flat at 105.1. We have felt that the dollar has peaked, and we felt kind of that way for several weeks. We think that the breakdown is there since the peak in September and a double-top test in late October, said Amo Sahota, executive director at FX consulting firm Clarity FX in San Francisco. That doesn't mean that the dollar will go directly lower from here. It can stay elevated but nowhere near the highs, not without fresh impetus. Consumer inflation data for November lands on Tuesday and is expected to show a 6.1% rise on a year-on-year basis in the core reading, which excludes food and energy prices, down from 6.3% in October. The weaker dollar is signaling that the market is seeing lower inflation, and it is hearing what Powell is saying, that the Fed is cutting back on the pace of its rate increases and the market is pricing all that in, said Joe Perry, senior market analyst at Forex.com and Citi Index in New York. This week is also one of the most macro-packed so far this year, with 4 major central banks holding their final policy meetings of 2022. The Fed, the ECB, Bank of England and Swiss National Bank will all release rate decisions this week. The Fed is widely expected to deliver a rate hike of 50 basis points after a series of 75 basis point increases. Investors will be keen to find out whether the Fed's rate forecasts exceed 5%. For now, Fed funds futures have priced in a terminal rate, or the level in which the Fed will stop hiking, of 4.984%, seen hitting in May. The dollar briefly rose as much as 0.5% against the pound after data showed the UK economy recovered in October after the hit from a public holiday for Queen Elizabeth's funeral the month before. Sterling was last flat at $1.2270. The offshore Chinese yuan slipped 0.3% against the US currency to 6.996 per dollar, further pressured by worries over a potential spike in COVID cases as China eases its stringent COVID-19 restrictions.
Former FTX CEO Sam Bankman-Fried refuses to testify before Senate, committee says. Former FTX CEO Sam Bankman-Fried is refusing to testify at a hearing this week about his company's implosion, the Senate Banking Committee said Monday. Attorneys for the crypto platform's founder have also said Bankman-Fried, who is based in the Bahamas, will not accept service of a subpoena to compel his testimony before the panel, senators said. Bankman-Fried is scheduled to appear at a House Financial Services Committee hearing on Tuesday that will focus on his company's collapse. In a joint statement, Senate Banking Chair Senator Sherrod Brown, Democrat Ohio, and Ranking Member Pat Toomey, Republican Pennsylvania, said they have offered Sam Bankman-Fried 2 different dates for providing testimony before the Senate Banking, Housing, and Urban Affairs Committee, and are willing to accommodate virtual testimony. He has declined in an unprecedented abdication of accountability, they said. Given that Bankman-Fried's counsel has stated they are unwilling to accept service of a subpoena, we will continue to work to have him appear before the committee. He owes the American people an explanation, they said. Earlier Monday, Bankman-Fried said he is not currently scheduled to testify at the hearing. In a Twitter Spaces interview, he also noted that he's open and willing to have a conversation about appearing before the committee. Brown and Toomey recently threatened in a letter to Bankman-Fried to subpoena him if he chose not to appear at the Wednesday hearing. Bankman-Fried was called to testify in front of the Senate committee after his crypto exchange FTX crashed in a matter of days. Before the company imploded, FTX reportedly transferred billions of dollars in client funds to Bankman-Fried's trading firm, Alameda Research. In the letter to Bankman-Fried requesting his testimony, Brown and Toomey wrote that there are still significant unanswered questions about how client funds were misappropriated, how clients were blocked from withdrawing their own money, and how you orchestrated a cover-up.
G7 pledges to meet Ukraine's urgent air defense requirements. Russian missiles, artillery, and drones have hammered targets in eastern and southern Ukraine, as global economic powers pledged to beef up Kyiv's military capabilities with a focus on air defenses. The G7 promised on Monday to meet Ukraine's urgent requirements after President Volodymyr Zelensky appealed to the virtual G7 meeting for modern tanks, artillery firepower, and long-range weapons against Russia's devastating invasion. He also urged the G7 to help Kyiv obtain an extra 2 billion cubic meters of natural gas in light of Ukraine's dire energy shortages as millions languish without power in sub-zero cold after further Russian air raids on critical infrastructure. Separately, European Union foreign ministers agreed on Monday to put another €2 billion into a fund used to pay for military support for Ukraine, after it was largely depleted during almost 10 months of war. More top-ups may be possible at a later stage. British Defence Minister Ben Wallace said on Monday he would be open-minded about supplying Ukraine with longer-range missiles to target launch sites for Russian drones that have hit infrastructure if Russia carried on targeting civilian areas. Ukraine's Black Sea port of Odessa on Monday resumed operations suspended after Russia used Iranian-made drones on Saturday to hit 2 energy facilities. Power is slowly being restored to some 1.5 million people, but the situation remains difficult, national grid operator Ukrenergo said on Monday. Massive shelling. In its regular daytime report on the military situation, Ukraine's general staff said its forces had repelled Russian assaults on 4 settlements in the eastern Donetsk region and on 8 settlements in the adjacent Luhansk region. The regions are 2 of 4 in eastern and southern Ukraine that Moscow claims to have annexed after referendums branded illegal by Kyiv. Later in its evening update, the General Staff said Russian artillery had hammered nearly 20 frontline settlements around the eastern city of Bakhmut, which Moscow seeks to capture but is now largely in ruins due to incessant bombardment. Ukraine has said Russian forces are suffering huge losses in brutal dug-in warfare on the Eastern Front. On Monday, a senior United States military official said Russia was burning through so much ammunition that it was turning to decades-old munitions with high failure rates. At least 2 people were killed and 5 wounded in Kherson on Monday after what regional governor Yaroslav Yanushevich said was massive shelling by Russian forces of the southern city, which was captured by Ukrainian forces last month. Meanwhile, the Kremlin said on Monday that President Vladimir Putin would not hold his annual, marathon-like year-end news conference this month, a televised event he has used to showcase his command of issues and stamina. Zelensky said other areas experiencing very difficult conditions with power supplies included the capital Kyiv and Kyiv region, as well as 4 regions in western Ukraine and the Dnipropetrovsk region in the center of the country. United Nations Aid Chief Martin Griffiths arrived in Ukraine on Monday to see the impact of the humanitarian response and new challenges that have arisen as infrastructure damage mounts amid freezing winter temperatures, his office said. Unlivable conditions are likely to send another wave of hundreds of thousands of Ukrainian refugees into Europe over the winter, Jan Egeland, head of the Norwegian Refugee Council, told the Reuters news agency. Egeland said he feared the crisis in Europe would deepen and overshadow crises in other parts of the world. About 18 million people, or 40% of Ukraine's population, are dependent on aid, the UN says. Another 7.8 million have left the country for other parts of Europe. The EU foreign ministers also discussed but did not reach an agreement on a 9th package of sanctions on Russia over the invasion, EU Foreign Policy Chief Josep Borrell told reporters, though he hoped a deal would be clinched later this week. U.S. Treasury Secretary Janet Yellen told CBS's 60 Minutes Washington's support for Ukraine's military and economy, more than $50 billion, would continue for as long as it takes,